comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information and education, taking into consideration the UNESCO International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, as well as the need for the delivery of sexual and reproductive healthcare services. Now, let me just make this simpler for you. This is a form of teaching about sex that will involve children as young as 5 years old. That is what the UNESCO International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education tells us in chapter 5 of this book, that it will be teaching children about sex as early as 5 years old, and it will go up till 18, encompassing primary and secondary education, and could also go into the tertiary level in universities for young adults over 18. But they will start as early as 5. And what they will teach them is that they have the right to have sex, that they must use a condom when they're having sex, that they can negotiate when to have sex, that it is their right to have sex, and that people have a right to determine their own gender. They call it gender identity. People have a right to their own sexual orientation, whether they are inclined to be attracted sexually to the same sex or to the opposite sex. They have a right to it. They will be taught that they have a right to their own sexual expression, and that they have a right to abortion when they become pregnant. Females, when they become pregnant, they have a right to abortion, and countries must teach this in the education system. Now, if this is taught, it is going to increase the number of children engaged in sexual activities. It is going to produce a lot more unwanted pregnancies, a lot more sexually transmitted infections. It's going to make a present problem that we face worse. And furthermore, this is in violation of Bible's teachings. God never intended that children should be involved in sex. Children are not supposed to be involved in this. Sex is for adults, for male and female who are adults in the marriage relationship. And any sexual activity done by children is unlawful in the sight of God. And this is taught in Old and New Testaments. Therefore shall a man, not a child, not a boy, leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave to his wife, that is a married woman, an adult female, not a girl, and the two shall become one flesh. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Furthermore, condom does not really solve the problem of sexuality. It may prevent unintended pregnancies. It may prevent the transmission of sexually transmitted infections, but it is a violation of God's will, which is that all sexual activity be restricted to the man and the woman in the marriage relationship. So what should be taught instead of this is abstinence from sex until one reaches an adult age, that they're in a position to get married. And then after that, in the marriage relationship, there should be faithfulness between husband and wife until death. And that would solve many problems concerning sexuality that we have in the world. Another problem is that in the causing a drastic decline in the moral standard in the Bible, there is going to be the promotion of the legalization of abortion. We see in Article 10 in the European Union Organization of African, Caribbean, Pacific States on page 30, and going into page 31, that the parties shall focus on improving the access of women, and where appropriate girls, to all resources they need throughout life, such as in respect of health and private undertakings, with a special emphasis on women in vulnerable situations. Now, what this means is they're saying that women should be given the right and the resources that if they want to do something in private, which is really a euphemism for abortion, to get rid of an unintended pregnancy, that they should be facilitated in doing so. We also see that anyone who speaks out from the Bible against such practices are going to be prosecuted and tried in a court of law, because it says the parties shall support universal access to sexual and reproductive health commodities and healthcare services. And also it says the parties shall apply in full the non-discrimination principle as set out in Article 9 of the general part of this agreement, placing a priority on adopting and implementing comprehensive equality and anti-discrimination laws. So what it is saying is, if these laws that promote comprehensive equality, which is saying that male and male who are attracted to each other should be treated equally as male and female who are attracted to each other, there should be no treatment of any group in a different way. All should be treated with the same respect and acceptance, which would mean an acceptance of homosexuality, lesbianism, bisexuality, transgender. And anti-discrimination laws is really an unfortunate term, because when we speak out against these practices, we're not being unfair to these people. We're just trying to state what God intended for sexuality when He created the first woman for the first man and joined them together in marriage, and that marriage was not intended to be the union of two males or two females, because marriage was created by God primarily for reproduction, and people of the same sex cannot reproduce. So you're not being unfair in telling them that they should not engage in sexual relations with the same sex. You're just stating what God intended for sexuality. And to say that we're guilty of discrimination in pointing this out is not really true. We're not being unfair to these people. So if we violate these laws, we could be prosecuted. We could be called to account in a court of law. Now, on March 30th of this year, there was a 3-year case involving a woman who was a lawmaker in Finland. And she had put Romans chapter 1, verses 25 to 27 on a social media platform, which is a scripture that points out that there are people who engage in lesbianism and homosexuality and do things that are against God's will. And she didn't make any comment. She just put the scripture passage on the social media, and she was prosecuted and tried for 3 years. She was found to be not guilty on March 30, but the government is appealing that verdict, and they want to try the woman further because they're not satisfied with the outcome of the 3-year trial. You see what happened in Finland? The same thing will happen in the Caribbean, on the African continent, and in the Pacific area if this treaty is signed into law, because we won't be able to show from the Bible where somebody is doing something that is not right in the sight of God. Also, there is a part of this treaty that speaks out against what they call advocacy of hatred. In Article 9, under the heading Human Rights, Democracy, and Rule of Law, on page 28 of the general section of the treaty, it says the parties shall commit to the promotion of universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without discrimination based on any ground, including sex or other status, and fight all forms of related intolerance and all instances of advocacy of hatred. Then in Article 20, in the general section, page 43, it even calls this kind of action of pointing out the sins of homosexuality and lesbianism, terrorism, and violent extremism. I read, the parties recognizing the importance of tackling factors contributing to violent extremism in all its forms, including, notice what I'm reading, religious intolerance, hate speech, commit to opposing violent extremism, and foster religious tolerance. So, what happened in Finland just a few weeks ago is going to happen in the Caribbean, on the African continent, and in the Pacific area if this treaty is signed into law. And our moral standards are going to decline rapidly. Also, we see that this treaty is calling for all countries that are party to the treaty to change their laws that are against what is promoted in the treaty. So if, for example, in Jamaica, there is a law that is against buggery, that law would not be in line with what this treaty is requiring. So they're calling for all governments that have some different laws to make sure that their laws are coherent with the treaty and what it requires of party states. And so in Article 4, entitled Policy Coherence, in the general section of the treaty on page 23, it says the parties shall work towards coherent policies at national, regional, and international levels with a view to attaining the objectives of this agreement. So we are in trouble. Our moral standards are going to decline. I want to make it clear. No genuine child of God or follower of Jesus hates anybody. We don't hate anybody. So when we point out the wrongs that people do, we're doing it out of genuine concern for their own welfare and for their soul's salvation. And so it is really unfortunate for the European Union and the United Nations to call this discrimination or to call this hate speech or advocacy of hatred. We're not doing any such thing. We're just trying to state what God says and trying to call people to repent and to receive God's forgiveness and reconciliation. I don't know if you want some feedback on this before I go on to the second part.
Yeah. Let me just if I can unmute myself. I'm good. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But Buckland, I want to, because we were a little delayed, and so I just wanted to bring, because when you first started out, you outlined the six
Problems.
aspects of this.
Yes.
And so I want you to put that in context. And
Yes.
then I want us to, because, the Finland situation, not only was the congressperson brought to court, but also the bishop of Finland, who also repeated the same passage. I think he was also charged. And so
Yes.
I'm not sure what the outcome of that is. And I think the implication here is that this is a test case, so that what happens there would eventually happen around the globe. And especially for ministers and preachers of the gospel, that they will no longer be able to use the concept of sin, because then that becomes discrimination and a hate crime speech.
Yes.
So essentially, this would muzzle, preachers and ministers of the gospel. So I think, and this law has been on the books. It's just that we didn't have a prosecutor who have actually, took this up. So this is like the first time that an actual prosecutor is actually going to now enforce the law that's already on the books. But like you mentioned, and that's why I wanted you to go back and over that with the soft law and to explain that what will happen when you change the implication of that, how then that will have a significant impact on what we do, and especially in the Caribbean. So try to again, summarize that for us in terms of because we started late, and I know a
Yeah.
lot of folks may have missed some of the early part of that.
Yes, as you said, a bishop was involved. He's connected with the Lutheran Church, and he printed a 20-page tract written by that lawmaker from the Finnish government on what is proper marriage, that marriage is supposed to be between a man and a woman. And that was also brought into the lawsuit to add further substance to the charge made against the Finnish woman. And that's how the bishop got involved in being also charged. I think that what happened is that the judge on March 30 acquitted, since both of them were involved in the case together, acquitted both of them unless you have different information. But as you said, what we have here in this draft treaty is that all parties in this treaty, in the Caribbean, on the African continent, and in the Pacific, will be required, if they haven't done so yet, to legalize homosexuality, to legalize lesbianism, to legalize same-sex marriage, to legalize transgender, to legalize abortion. All of this is substantially in this treaty in essence. And that if we do not make sure that people abide by these laws that are in the draft treaty, then you're going to find that the trade treaty is going to abruptly end. And so what these politicians will be pressured to do in order to maintain the treaty is to prosecute people who speak out against these sexual practices that are legalized. And what happened in Finland could very well happen in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in Jamaica, in Antigua and Barbuda, in Trinidad and Tobago, on the African continent, in the Pacific region. And that's the trouble we're in. And this is why I am urging all Christians and all God-fearing people who might not be Christians as yet, that if you go on the browser, the computer browser, the internet browser, and type in eutreaty.org, that is eutreaty.org in common letters, you will find a petition, an online petition, that you can sign your name. It will be sent to the respective governments of each country so that they may know how many people in their countries are not in support of the treaty in its present form. So yes, we are in danger of moral decline. And there is a second problem, though I don't view this second problem as seriously as the first one. But the second problem is that if we get into this treaty, if we sign this into law, it is going to weaken a country's ability to be independent of foreign political control. Jamaica got its independence on August 6, 1962, from Great Britain, and ever since have been celebrating independence every year. If we go into this treaty, and if you in St. Vincent and the Grenadines go into this treaty, you may not lose your independence altogether, but it will be greatly weakened. And let me explain how that is the case. It is no longer the parliament in your country that will ultimately decide what is law, what is permitted or what is not permitted. It is the Organization of African, Caribbean, Pacific States, along with the European Union representatives, Council of Ministers, that shall adopt decisions that are binding on all parties. And not only that, and that is taken from the general section of this treaty on page 132, from Article 88 entitled OACPS-EU Council of Ministers. Also, on page 145 of this general section of the treaty, it says the OACPS-EU Council of Ministers may refuse to give its consent for an amendment deemed not to be consistent with this agreement, and shall notify the relevant regional council of ministers of the reasons for its refusal. I want you to notice the levels of authority. You have the Caribbean Regional Council of Ministers, that if they disagree about a certain section of the treaty, they could write why they disagree and send it to the Council of Ministers. But if the Council of Ministers disagree with the Regional Caribbean Council of Ministers, then there is nothing the Regional Caribbean Council of Ministers can do, because the Council of Ministers of Europe and the representatives from the three regions, the Caribbean, Africa, and the Pacific region, are the ultimate deciders of what goes and what does not go. Not the regional council representing the Caribbean, but representatives from the Caribbean, from Africa, from the Pacific, representatives from the European Union. These council of ministers are at the highest level. They will determine what is and what is not. Another problem is in Chapter 1, entitled Human Rights, Justice and Governance, Article 32, under the heading of Human Rights, it says that the parties shall recognize and observe the independence of national human rights institutions and foster a safe and enabling environment where human rights defenders can operate freely and have access to regional and international mechanisms as appropriate. Let me translate that for you. What it is saying is that each government in the Caribbean and in Africa and in the Pacific should allow independent observers to monitor to what extent each government is abiding by the conditions of this trade agreement, and to be able to report to the highest level body, the European Union ACP Council of Ministers. Jamaica is in violation, for example, and therefore they will punish Jamaica for not abiding by the treaty. So you don't have complete independence of our government or the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to decide what we should or should not do. We will be having people that we did not elect in an election to determine for us what will go and what will not go. And so our independence will be weakened. If it will not be removed, but it will be weakened. And I don't think anyone really wants that. Any citizen really wants that. Another problem is, number 3, it will be legally binding. Article 98 says The parties shall express their consent to be bound by this agreement. That is Article 98, subsection 1. So it is not going to be a soft law meaning that you may observe it if you want, or you may not observe it if you don't want to. It is going to be law that is required to be observed, or else you will be guilty of breaking it. A fourth problem is how long it lasts. It lasts for 20 years at a time before it is renewed. According to Article 99, entitled Duration, this agreement is concluded for an initial period of 20 years. Now, we have an election in Jamaica roughly, or constitutionally, every 5 years. Sometimes we have it earlier, depending on the political strategies involved. But if this treaty is in effect, no matter which party wins an election, they will be legally bound to abide by the treaty, or else they will suffer the consequences. It lasts for 20 years. That's roughly about 4 elections in Jamaica. And that's quite a long time to be teaching comprehensive sexual education to children, and they grow up and they think that this is what is okay because this is legal and this is what I'm taught by my teacher or my lecturer. It's going to have an indelible impression upon these children as they become adults. Number 5, the fifth problem, trade cut off without prior consultations. It says in Article 101, under the heading Dispute Settlement and Fulfillment of Obligations, subsection 7, if either party considers that a violation of any of the essential elements constitutes a case of special urgency, it may take appropriate measures with immediate effect without prior consultations. And what is interpreted as appropriate measures in subsection 8 that follows, it says appropriate measures may include the suspension in part or in full of this agreement. So without any prior discussion, if we violate the law that you should legalize homosexuality, you don't legalize homosexuality, you still say it is illegal, then they could cut off the trade abruptly without any prior discussion on it. We don't want to enter into a trade agreement like that. We're not against trade, but we don't want those conditions to be attached to it. And the sixth problem is previous UN treaties and conventions to be legally binding. Now, what many people don't realize is that the declarations of the United Nations, what they call international law, and their declarations and conventions are not hard laws. They are soft laws, meaning that they may be followed depending on the discretion of the government of a country. But once we enter into this agreement in its present form, it says in Article 3, subsection 3, in the Caribbean Regional Protocol section on page 4, the parties undertake to sign, ratify, or accede to, and implement key relevant and applicable international treaties and conventions. Now, we know that in previous UN declarations and treaties, they have stated that they have legalized same-sex marriage, they have legalized abortion on demand for any and every reason. Those were soft laws to us in Jamaica. We were not obligated to follow them because they go against our laws. But if we sign this treaty into law, all these soft laws will become hard and fast, legally binding documents that we will be guilty of breaking if we don't abide by them. So these are 6 problems that I have independently looked at in this um, African, Caribbean, Pacific, European Union Treaty, which is in its draft form, but it is scheduled to be signed in June. And I appeal to you in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and wherever you are listening, whether in some other Caribbean country, on the African continent, or in the Pacific area, please go to eutreaty.org. That is eutreaty.org. Sign the petition so that you can add your voice or add your name to the growing number of people that are finding out about this treaty, to try to influence your government not to make the mistake of signing this treaty into law. Back to you, Dr. Davis.
Yes, and I really want to thank you for clarifying that for us and being as detailed. And I think many of us as Christians, I think sometimes we become so passive that we somehow think that these things will go away. But I think the world is tightening its position. And I think it's time for God's people to become more active and more aggressive in terms of what Peter did in Acts chapter, I think it's Acts chapter 4, when he was challenged and he was negotiating. And in fact, they were negotiating with him and said, look, you can go free if you just don't say what you're saying. And Peter made it very clear that I cannot help but speak. And so the issue here is that there is a massive movement to silence and to edit the words of God. And I think once we engage in that, we're putting ourselves on a collision course with God. And I believe that the 21st century is pretty much on a collision course with God. And so we really need to get this message out, because no longer will we be able to, in a transformative and in a corrective fashion, help men and women to correct their life so that it comes in harmony with God. Because then we will be accused of hate crime. And this is what this is, really is. Because, and then what will then happen? The Bible itself will no longer be valid in terms of shaping our society, shaping our values, and creating a safe place for our children to develop the kind of virtues and characters that they need to. And teachers would be terminated, ministers would be silent. And there are many, unfortunately, Brother Buckland, there are many religious organizations who are already warped into this sort of a programming and are pretty much singing these kinds of songs. And so, too many of us, I think, are silent on this issue. And that's why I really wanted to bring this program tonight. And so, I want to encourage our listeners, and let me give them the number, Brother Buckland. There are 3 numbers, and actually, they're too small for me to even. I can't even see these numbers. But let me see. Okay, I can see them a little. No, I can't see them. Come on, can you tell us what those numbers are? They're too small.
Sure. Um, the fixed line is 457-9997. That's 457-9997. You can send in WhatsApp messages at 457-9994, or you can make a digital call at 532-9997.
Right. So again, this is Joseph Buckland. He's out from Jamaica, and he is an instructor, teacher. He spent many years both in the secular field and in the Christian community as well. And so tonight we certainly want you to engage him. This is an interactive program, and he's bringing us up to date with what's about to happen in June. And so we have to begin to pass this message on. And I hope that tonight you can call us and interact with us. And I'm sure Brother Buckland is open and willing to answer any questions tonight that you have. Brother Buckland, is there any other, in terms of the implications, some of the practical, as it will affect, in terms of how would this have an impact on some of our Christian educational institutions in terms of their licensure, in terms of, getting government funding, um, if they're not, if
Definitely,
these things are not enforced?
definitely. If this is signed into law, and a Christian educational institution is not abiding by the laws of that country, which are supposed to be coherent or in line with the African, Caribbean, Pacific European Union Treaty, if signed into law, then that Christian educational institution could lose its permission to operate, and the persons that are in charge of that institution could get themselves into trouble with the law. Christians that are working in primary schools, secondary schools, tertiary educations like colleges and universities might be pressured and forced to teach comprehensive sexual education, and they may refuse. And if they refuse, they could lose their jobs. Members of government who don't agree with the treaty, with the conditions attached to the trade, they could also lose their jobs in the political sphere. So we find that Christians will have an increase in persecution, loss of jobs, maybe loss of friendships, and you might also find Christians, I do not know what the penalties will be. I don't think that has been worked out, what the penalties or punishments will be. But certainly what happened in Finland recently in the past 3 years could well be repeated in any of our countries in the Caribbean. And we certainly don't want that to happen. And so I appeal to you again to go to the eutreaty.org website and sign the petition asking the government of your country not to sign the treaty in its present form. But there are other ways in which you can help. If you have call-in programs, you can call in and discuss this treaty and what concerns you about it, and try to influence the society to put pressure on your government or governments not to sign this treaty. You could go online to the different Caribbean newspapers and write your letter to the editor as to why the treaty in its present form should not be signed. So there are different ways that you can help people to come to understand the dangers of this treaty. And I want to encourage Christian leaders to educate your members and the society in general about the dangers of this treaty, and continue to teach people in your different communities what God's moral standards are, so that if this, God forbid, is signed by your governments, they will already have the moral standard of the Bible in their heart, that they will know individually that they should not follow these immoral standards that are being imposed upon us by outside forces.
Can you give us again the website where they can actually get the treaty? It's
Yes, you can go to eutreaty.org. Okay, eutreaty.org, and you will not only see the petition, but you will see the ACP EU treaty in its full text. Nothing edited, nothing taken out. It's full text. What I did was to study a whole lot of pages and put a condensed version together. But it is quite more reading than what I have read today. Okay, but you can see the full text on that same website, eutreaty.org, and you can study it for yourself and find out what the truth is.
Now, those organizations that are actually rallying against this treaty, can you share some of those sites that folks can become a part of, lend their voice to?
Okay, I believe that Caribbean Cause, which has links with different Christian leaders in Caribbean countries, is part of this effort to help people know about the dangers of this treaty. And in Jamaica, I know that Chosen to Glow Ministries is also active. I'm one of the directors of Chosen to Glow Ministries, is actively engaged in helping people understand the dangers of this treaty. Also, Lawyers Christian Fellowship, a Jamaican-based organization, is also actively engaged in trying to help people understand about this treaty and why the government of the Caribbean countries and Africa and the Pacific region should not sign it. And the Issachar Foundation is putting on a special program. I believe it is on May 2, next week. And it will be a Zoom meeting that they will have. I'm going to call, Sarah, can you come and help me here? Or I will soon tell you more about it, but
Right. In the meantime, while you're doing that, I would really like, if you have the time,
yeah,
to be back next Wednesday with us, and
yes,
to keep us. I think we need to keep this topic, going.
yes,
And so, if you have the time, we could probably continue it, and maybe until the time for the actual voting, which is a month away.
yes. Okay, you can tell me the Zoom number and the passcode for the Issachar Foundation. Okay, in a few minutes I will be
Right,
getting
right.
this.
Post that because
Yes,
yeah, if we can
I
get that.
put it in the
Actually,
chat. Huh?
we 5 minutes over time, but let's just try to wind it up and summarize and the takeaway message at this point.
Okay, so in summary, what I've shared with you are concerns about the African, Caribbean, Pacific, European Union Treaty. It is going to cause a drastic decline in the moral standards of our different countries. It is also going to weaken political independence. It is also going to be legally binding. It is also going to last for 20 years at a time. Trade also could be abruptly ended if we don't follow the conditions that are attached to it. And we will have to follow the different United Nations declarations and conventions and treaties that were not hard and fast in the past. They were called soft laws. We could implement them at our own discretion, but now when we sign this treaty into law, it is going to be hard and fast. And now I'm going to put the Zoom meeting ID on the chat.
Okay.
Okay, here it is. So I'm putting it in the chat at this time. Zoom meeting ID.
While you're doing that, again, I want to thank you, and I want to thank our listeners tonight for being patient with us. We were running a little late,
3,
and I really appreciate you
8,
tuning in. You've been listening to the
5,
Full and
4,
Abundant Life program. My name is Claudius Davis, and we're here each Wednesday night from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. right here in WeFM. And we certainly would encourage you to share the program with your friends and families, and hopefully, especially this particular program, that you can go back and listen and review, because it's really important in terms of what's going on in our world, in terms of the shaping the secular and humanistic agenda that is designed to crush Christianity. And so we certainly need to be able um, to stand up. And Brother Buckland, the scriptures keep re-emphasizing the point that
yeah,
we have sort of paid lip service to that. We've not paid much attention to it. Well, there's some part of the world they've experienced that, but I think in the United States in particular, we have enjoyed the freedom and the luxury of being complacent and indifferent,
yeah,
and we didn't have to pay the price. But I think the time has come where we've been called to really pay the price. That it's not just enough to preach; we have to practice.
yeah,
And this issue is calling for us to become active participant and to practice and stand up for the values that are sacred, that has so much in terms of our future and our eternal life. Because I connect those two things together.
yeah,
Because if the world wins, then Jesus is coming in second. And anytime Jesus comes in second, a soul is lost.
yeah.
And I think that this particular treaty is heading in that direction.
Yes, Dr. Davis, I've put the Zoom information in the private chat. Zoom
Right.
meeting ID 873-383-8354,
Right.
passcode 546570. And the Zoom meeting is on Tuesday, May 3 at 6:30 p.m. Jamaica time.
Right.
It is going to be hosted by Sharon Slater, who is president of Family Watch International. She was the first one that helped me to know the dangers of this treaty before I did my independent research into it. And the next speaker is Richard Kakito, lecturer in human rights, Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Okay, so the title of this Zoom meeting is Keep Us Free from Evil Powers, an expose on the new EU-ACP treaty. And it is presented by Issachar Foundation in Jamaica. So I plan to go to it to find out more. And I'm inviting all the listeners to take this down in your notebooks and to join in the Zoom meeting at that time. Note that 6:30 p.m. is Jamaica time or Eastern Standard Time.
I want to encourage all of you to be a part of that particular group. It can be very informative. And I also want to thank Brother Buckland for his time and for the wonderful job that he has done tonight on this program and continue to do in terms of lending his voice to what is so needed today. And so I thank you, and I hope that God will continue to give you good strength and health so that you can continue to fight the good fight. Thank you so much, and I want to thank
Thank you, Dr.
our
Davis.
listeners, thank our technician for being here with us here tonight. We've already gone over 10 minutes, and again, I want to thank you all. And Brother Buckland, I hope that next Wednesday that we can do the same thing, and
Okay.
maybe come back and look at it different angles,
Yes.
and maybe look at it maybe more from a more spiritual. Bring some passages to bear, with some of the things that you've said that I think might be very helpful for others as well. So thank you so much, and may God bless.
It's a
Bye-bye.
pleasure. God bless you all.
Liberation, not enslavement to addictions, human traditions, or mediocrity. Are you living abundantly?
Health of our society, the future and health of our homes depends largely on how we do what God expects us to do.
Join Dr. Claudius Davis on the Full and Abundant Life program here on WeFM 99.9.